Coaches, welcome back to another reflection on the U11 boys basketball team that I'm coaching. Before I dive into a bit of a lengthy reflection, it's been a little while since I've done one. I just wanted to let you know about the 2022 Summer Coaching Series. It consists of 10 weekly presentations plus 2 bonus sessions from coaches and experts from across sports. They're going to be chocked with tons of practical ideas that you can apply in your coaching. I'm really excited about this Summer Coaching Series, and I think you would find it really valuable if you enjoy this podcast and these reflections. When you sign up for the Summer Coaching Series, you'll get live access to every session, the video replays from every session, the audio-only replays on a private podcast feed, and detailed coaching notes from each session. The Summer Coaching Series is going to be awesome. Like I said, chock full of practical ideas from these presenters that you can apply in your coaching to grow yourself, grow your team, and ultimately make a better impact on the athletes that you are coaching and leading. So I would love for you to be a part of it. You can learn more or sign up at summercoachingseries.com. And now for my reflection on the last handful of practices and quite a few games. First, practice number 11. This was a practice where I was just thinking about afterwards the difficulty of finding the right level of challenge for your athletes. And I think it's something I've talked about before in these reflections, but finding that desirable difficulty level for the athletes that you coach, which changes from age and stage. And even within the context of your team, it often varies by player because every player is at a little bit of a different place on their journey. And so one of the biggest challenges for me personally, and I think for most coaches, is finding that right level of challenge for the entire group and or for individuals. And when we're doing, a group activity or game, how do we use the right constraints to ensure that it's at that right level of challenge for everyone involved? And no, it won't be perfect all the time, especially when we're doing group things, but I think it's really important for us to consider because the reality is if the environment, if the games and the drills are too easy, it's going to lead to boredom. Our athletes just aren't going to enjoy it. It's going to be too easy. And on the other side of that, if it's too hard, it's going to lead to stress and anxiety, right? And neither of those are going to put them in the optimal performance state. But what we're going for is that just right level where there's struggle, but they can still succeed. And we know that that is what leads to growth. And so that's what I was thinking about after practice number 11. Just so important that we really, really consider and try to find the right level of challenge for our athletes. And after practice number 11, we had a couple games. And my big takeaway from games 9 and 10 was the importance of how we frame losing as the coach. And here's what I mean by that. We played 2 games on this Saturday, and we played really well in the first game, and we got beat by a team that destroyed us the first game of the year. And what I emphasized to our team after that game was, first, sometimes you play well and still get beat. And second, I highlighted how much we had improved since the first time we played them. The first time we played them, they pretty much dominated us. And the second time we played them, it was a really close game. I think we still lost by 8 or 9 points, but it was even closer for most of the game than the score line reflected. They hit some tough shots that kind of put the game away. But yeah, overall, we played really well. And I wanted our team to recognize that, hey, sometimes you give your best and you still come up short on the scoreboard. And that's okay. That's life. And then the second thing is to just look at, man, how much better have we gotten since the first time we played them? And to look at that growth and to keep our mindset focused on that process of growing and getting better. It was really rewarding for me to see too, even in the loss, that, man, we got a lot better and we've come a long ways from where we started. The next kind of reflection I had was on practice number 12. And my takeaway from this was that it's okay to have a bad practice. This was a practice that I just didn't love the flow of. I don't think I planned it super well. And, some of the challenges that often happen in youth sports of your numbers fluctuate, kids come late or have to leave early can affect it. But it just wasn't a great practice. And I think it's important for us as coaches to not have the unrealistic expectation of we can't have a bad practice, especially at the youth level. It's just not realistic. Not only for ourselves as a coach, sometimes we show up and we're not at our best, or sometimes we plan something in our mind and it just flops when we do it, and it can kind of throw off our practice. But also our athletes, they come into our practices, into the space, bringing a lot of stuff with them. And sometimes they have bad days, and it's things outside of our sport and practice affect them when they come into this space. And so I think it's just important for us to realize, man, it's okay if a practice doesn't go like you were hoping or expecting it to go. It happens to everyone. And I think the important thing is that we reflect and adjust. If you have athletes that need to be called up to your standard, do it, and then do it better the next time. Raise your expectation and standard for yourself and for them in a respectful way, and get better going forward from there. It's okay if you have a bad practice. And then after practice number 13, this was actually a pretty encouraging practice, especially after the previous one that I just didn't feel like was very good. Practice number 13 was really one of the first times I felt like they were getting it. And that's how long it took. 13 practices for me to really feel like they were understanding and had learned some of the key concepts we've been focusing on throughout the season, namely spacing, sharing the ball, and shot selection. Those three things have been my main focus offensively. And after this practice, I was just like, man, I think they're getting it. It's really starting to click. And so that was awesome to see. And again, my takeaway was, man, that's a long time. It takes time. Learning takes time. We should be patient. It may take 10, 12, 13 practices for your athletes to really learn what's most essential. And I think it's important that we remember that, and we don't jump ship and try to change things after practice 4 or 5 because it's not showing up yet. It takes time. Be patient with it. And then reflections from games this last weekend, which in my tweet I said there were games 8 through 10 and game 11. That was wrong. These were games 11 through 14. First, we played 3 games on a Saturday. That would have been games 11, 12, and 13. And my reflection on this was that losing kind of sucks. It's not super enjoyable for coaches and athletes. And it can be harder when you're losing to keep kids focused on and bought into the process or a growth-oriented culture and climate when you are getting beat. And I caught some pushback to some of this when I shared this reflection on Twitter, but this was prompted by, and my thinking behind this is this, 3 things. 1, we have really competitive kids who want to win, and a few of them were in tears after we lost the second game. We lost all 3 games this day, and after the second one, our guys were really frustrated. A couple of them, quite literally in tears. I asked one of them, "Hey, dude, what's going on?" He just said, I hate losing. It stinks. It sucks. Like, we want to win. They're competitive. We're competitive. It's okay to recognize that we can still be focused on the long-term development, and we can still be focused on the process, and we can recognize that losing does kind of suck. It's hard to lose. The second thing was just how difficult it can be to keep kids focused on what they can control when things aren't going well. And by that, I just mean, what can they do in the present moment to help our team instead of focusing on what they might feel like are bad calls or missed calls, or focused on something that a kid on another team is doing or saying to them. It's hard, and it becomes harder when you're losing. I think it really does, for coaches and for teammates to hold each other to that standard of focusing on what we can actually control. And then the third thing I was thinking about with that reflection is, as a coach, one of the things that sucked for me, or was hard for me from those 3 games, was I saw my kids play really hard, do their absolute best, and still have poor outcomes. And that stinks to see, because I want them to succeed, especially because their effort and their buy-in is so high. And I think that it's okay for all of those things to coexist together. We can be focused on the process, and we can be true to our beliefs and values. I've told parents and athletes, I'm not going to sacrifice their long-term development for doing things that are going to win games now. And losing is still not enjoyable. It still can suck at times. And so I think that it's important for us to recognize that those things can, exist together. It's okay to be competitive, even at the young levels, to feel that, for athletes to feel that, for coaches to feel that. I think it's just important that we don't let those emotions cause us to do things that might win in the short term, but lose in the long term. And my other reflection from our final game of the weekend was just how hard it can be to maintain emotional composure. In this game, we had more turnovers than shot attempts. It was really frustrating. The score was 2-0. We were down 2-0 at halftime. We were playing great defense, but we just continued to turn it over. And after the game, I took some of the blame as far as I probably didn't prepare our team enough for some of the things that we've seen in our basketball games, namely like full court zone presses, just because I believe it's bad for development. And we've spent so much time doing what I believe are good things for our team in their long-term development in our practices that I probably neglected a little bit to prepare them for some of the technical, tactical things that they have seen and are going to see. And I should have done a better job of that. So I own that for them. And said that we would work on it and get better on it. And that's what we did in the next practice. And that leads me into the final piece of this reflection on practice number 14, practice last on this past Monday. And, my big takeaway from this practice is I was just reflecting on what has worked well with this team this year. And there's two things that are kind of unrelated, but they were what came to mind. The first is just noticing and celebrating progress a lot, both on the individual and team level. I'm just looking for any opportunity I can to celebrate an athlete and say, hey, you're doing something now that you weren't very good at earlier. Or, man, I can see how much better you've got at making this decision or training this habit, whatever it is. Or as a team, guys, we're so much better at this than we used to be. It's so powerful and important that we just highlight and notice that progress constantly. And then the second thing is I've really tried to intentionally limit the time of on air, and by on air I mean without a defense, repetitions or reps, to 10% of my practice max. And so I have a 90-minute practice. That means maximum I want to spend 9 minutes doing on-air reps or reps without defense. And there's a couple of reasons for that. One, I want as much of what we do to transfer the game as possible. And I know that we've got to link perception and action. There's got to be offense versus defense for it to actually show up and transfer in the game. And the second thing is the attention spans of fifth graders, under 11s, is really short. And one of the worst things that I can have them doing is standing in a line or waiting to sub in, because they will get distracted and it just won't be good for the flow of our practice, the focus, the energy, intensity of our practice. And I want to keep as many as active as possible, as long as possible. And so that's just kind of one of my rules of thumb that I've used, about 10% max, 9 minutes of my practice I can do on-air stuff. And I'll just say this, I think that 10% sometimes is really valuable and needed. For example, we had to work on just a pattern to breaking a zone press. Again, we've seen a bunch of full court zone press in U11. It's not something I think should be happening that's good for development, but it's the reality of what is happening. And so I needed to prepare our guys a little bit for it, more than I had. And so we spent some time working on essentially a pattern of movement that we can use to hopefully be more successful breaking it. And I think it was an appropriate time to do a little bit of on-air and then do it live against some defense. So yeah, that's my reflection from practice 14. Notice progress and limit that time of on-air reps to 10% of your practice. I think it'll make better practices for everyone and hopefully get the most out of it where it's transferring to games, because it's offense versus defense and it is actually representative of the game. So coaches, I appreciate you taking the time to listen to this. I hope you found it valuable. And if you have any questions or follow-ups to anything I shared here, just want to go a little bit deeper or pick my brain on something that I shared, you can just send me an email at luke@cuttingedgecoach.com. I'd love to talk with you, and we'll get back to you in a pretty timely manner. That does it for this reflection. Like I mentioned in the intro, please check out summercoachingseries.com if you want to learn more or get access to the 2022 Summer Coaching Series. Would love to have you be a part of it. Thanks for listening.